You want to know the truth about that day? Fine. I'll tell it the way it happened, not the way the recruiters tell it now, with the music behind it and the slow shots of her boots in the ash. They cut all the boring parts out. But the boring parts are where you learn who a person is, so I'm going to leave them in. My name doesn't matter much. Where I come from, a name is a small thing anyway. We're called the Sethari if you want the word for us. We came out of a warm world, all cliffs and long echoing valleys, and our whole history is built on voice. You climb rank by voice. You court by voice. A newborn is welcomed into the clan the first time it cries loud enough to be heard from the next ridge. Silence, in my culture, is what you give to the dead. So keep that in mind when I tell you about the girl, because for a long time, to me, she may as well have been a ghost. They dropped her into my company on a wet gray morning at Relay Station Harrow 6. That's a rock, by the way. Don't picture a world. Picture a moon the color of a healing bruise, no real sky, just a low ceiling of clouds that never rained and never left. There was a base half buried in the crust, and around it a lot of nothing, and past the nothing the ridgeline where the old mining rigs stood rusting like the bones of things too big to bury. I was a sergeant then, the 14th Auxiliary. We were not a proud unit. We were the leftovers, the mixed bag, the ones nobody fought over when the fleets divided up their people. I had a Bren heavy gunner who talked in his sleep. I had 2 Osseck twins who could not be told apart and did not try to help you. I had a medic named Paulo who complained about his knees on a moon where the gravity was barely there. And I had 1 human. That was unusual. Humans were still new to the coalition back then. New and honestly a little bit of a joke, small, soft-skinned. No claws worth the name, no scales, no venom. They breathed the same air as us, but they got cold easy and they slept too much and they made noise about everything, laughing, arguing, singing while they worked. You could hear a human squad coming from a kilometer off. Loud people, warm people. Which is why I noticed, right away, that this one wasn't. She came off the transport last, after the crates, after everyone. Small even for a human. Dark hair cut rough, like she'd done it herself with a field knife and no mirror. Gray eyes. She had a duffel over one shoulder and she stood there in the drizzle looking at the base like she was reading it. I walked over. That's my job, meeting the new ones. I planted my feet and I lifted my voice the way you do, the formal welcome, the one that carries. You're the human, I said, Ada Vance, rifle specialist, 3rd class. I read it off the manifest strapped to my forearm. Welcome to the 14th. You'll find we don't stand much on ceremony here. I waited for the noise. The nervous laugh, the thank you sir, the too many words. All the humans I'd met, that's what they did, filled the air. She just looked at me, nodded once. Then she picked her duffel back up and waited to be shown where to go. I stood there a second longer than I meant to. Then I pointed her toward the barracks and I told myself she was tired. Long transit, first posting, give it a day. But the next day she didn't talk either, or the day after. It took me almost a week to understand she wasn't shy. Shy people talk eventually when they get comfortable, when someone's kind to them. Ada didn't. She wasn't cold about it. She'd catch your eye and give you this small tilt of the head that meant I heard you. She'd write things down when she had to. She carried a little scratched-up slate, an old civilian one, and she'd thumb out a word or two and turn it around so you could read it. But her voice, her actual voice, she kept. Paulo, my medic, checked her file. There was a med flag on it, he said, but it was sealed. Not a physical thing, he told me one night, quiet so the others wouldn't hear. Her throat works fine, it's something else. Something happened. What happened? Sealed means sealed, Sergeant. He shrugged those bad shoulders of his. You don't get to know, she earned that much. I remember I didn't like it. And I want to be honest with you, so I'll tell you exactly why I didn't like it, even though it makes me look small. It wasn't that I was cruel. I wasn't. It was that in my head, a soldier who won't call out is a soldier who will get you killed. You need voices in a fight. You need someone screaming left, left, contact left when your eyes are full of smoke. A silent soldier felt like a broken tool to me. Worse, she felt like a risk. And I already had a company full of misfits and cast-offs. I did not need a mute one. So I did what a lot of people did with Ada Vance, which is nothing. I overlooked her. I put her on the jobs where a voice didn't matter. Wire runs, loader duty, standing perimeter watch on the dead side of the base where the only thing to report was the wind. I told myself I was being practical. Really, I just didn't want to think about her. And here's the thing about overlooking someone. Once you start, everyone follows. The company took its cue from me. The twins ignored her. The Bren gunner, who liked to josh everybody, never bothered to josh her, because there's no fun in teasing someone who won't tease back. She ate alone. She trained alone. She'd be out on the range before the rest of us woke, and by the time we got there she'd be gone, and the only sign she'd been was a neat little cluster of holes dead center on the far target, tight as a coin. I noticed that actually. The shooting. Anyone would've. But I filed it under lucky and moved on, because it's easy to explain away one good thing about a person you've already decided not to see. That was my mistake. I'm the one telling this story, so I'll own it. I looked right at her every day for 2 months, and I never once actually saw her. Not until Cinder burned. Let me set the scene properly, because you need to understand what we were and what we weren't. Harrow 6 wasn't a fortress. It was a relay, a big dumb antenna and a power core and a garrison small enough to fit in a mess hall. Our whole reason for being there was to keep the long-range comms alive for the mining colonies scattered across that whole sector. Thousands of civilians out there in their little pressurized towns, and every one of them depended on the signal that ran through our rock to call for help, to trade, to hear a voice from home. If Harrow 6 went dark, they went blind. The coalition thought the sector was quiet. That's why they gave it to a unit like us. Quiet postings for quiet units. Nobody expected the Kell. You probably know the Kell now. Everyone does. But back then they were a rumor, a border country boogeyman. Raiders. They'd taken the machine road further than anyone should carve themselves up, bolted iron over bone, traded pieces of their bodies for pieces that didn't tire, didn't fear, didn't feel. What was left of the animal inside them was mostly appetite. They came for resources, for materiel, for the raw stuff of more Kell. They didn't take prisoners because a prisoner is a mouth, and they had no use for mouths. They came for Harrow 6 because of the power core. A relay like ours runs on a fusion heart, and to something like the Kell, that heart was a feast. They wanted it. They wanted the antenna too, not to use, to kill, because a sector that can't scream for help is a sector you can strip at your leisure. We got maybe 4 minutes of warning. The far pickets lit up and went silent, one after another, like someone walking down a hall turning off lights. Then the sky, that low dead ceiling, opened up in 3 places, and their drop pods came down through it burning. I want to describe the sound, but I'm not sure I can. It wasn't like a normal assault. There were no engines to speak of. The pods came in silent and hit the crust with a sound like a giant hammering the moon, and each hit you felt in your teeth before you heard it. Then the pods cracked open like seed casings, and the Kell came out already running. You've maybe seen the drills, the sim footage. It's not like that. In a sim, the enemy comes in a line and you cut them down. The Kell came in a tide. Low and fast and wrong-jointed, some of them on 4 limbs, some on 6, all of them dull iron gray, all of them making this one shared sound, a kind of dry clicking, thousands of them at once, like a forest full of insects the size of dogs. To a Sethari, whose whole soul is tuned to voice, that clicking got in behind my ribs and sat there. It wasn't a war cry. War cries you can answer. This was the sound of something that had thrown its own voice away a long time ago and didn't miss it. I got my company up. I'll give myself that. When it mattered, I didn't freeze. I had them at the east wall in 90 seconds, and I was calling it loud. The way I know how, hold the line, mark your sectors, wait for the range, my voice carrying over the wall, over the clicking, doing the one thing my people are actually good at. And somewhere down the line, in the noise and the cold and the fear, Ada Vance took her place at the wall with the rest of us. Quiet, same as always. I didn't look at her. I was busy. I want you to understand, even then, with everything coming apart, I still didn't look at her. The first wave we held, barely. The wall did most of it. It was old and ugly, but it was thick, and the Kell had to funnel through the gaps in the ridgeline to reach us, and in a funnel, even a unit like mine can do damage. The Bren gunner earned his pay that hour. So did the twins, who turned out to fight exactly alike, which is terrifying to watch. Paulo dragged two of ours back from a collapsing section and patched them under fire without once mentioning his knees. I remember thinking, in the thick of it, maybe we do this. Maybe the relief fleet gets the signal we were bleeding to keep alive, and comes, and we just have to last. Then their walker came over the ridge. I don't have a good word for it. It was a Kell thing, so it was a machine wearing the shape of a living creature, or a creature wearing a machine, and either way it stood 3 times the height of the wall, and it moved like something that had never once in its life felt uncertain. Where it stepped, the crust cratered. It had a weapon slung under it, a heavy cutting beam meant for exactly one job: opening walls. Opening us. The line broke when the wall did. The beam took a whole section of the east wall and just unmade it, melted it, dropped it, turned 20 meters of cover into a glowing gap, and the tide, which had been dammed, found the hole and poured through it. I lost the shape of the fight then. That's what happens. One second you have a line and orders and sectors, and the next you have 100 small, desperate fights all happening at once and no way to see any of them. I was down off the wall in the gap, firing into the gray, and I could hear my own voice going hoarse from calling out positions that didn't exist anymore. My company was scattering. Not running, scattering, which is worse, because runners you can rally and scattered soldiers you can only mourn. And the walker came through the gap it had made. It came for the relay corps. Straight line, no hesitation, stepping over its own dead and ours the same. If it reached the corps, the station was gone. And more than the station, the signal was gone. Every colony in the sector went blind and deaf in the same instant, and the Kell got the whole board to themselves. And thousands of people I would never meet started dying in towns I'd never see, because we hadn't held a wall on a bruise-colored moon. I knew all that in about half a second, and I knew we couldn't stop it. We didn't have the weapons. The one gun that might have dented that thing was the Bren's, and the Bren was down, not dead. I found out later, but down, buried under a piece of the wall, his gun pinned with him. So I did the only thing left. I called the retreat. I put my voice into it, everything I had, the loudest thing I've ever done in my life: fall back to the corps, fall back, form on the corps, trying to at least gather my scattered people into one last knot around the thing we were dying for. And into all that noise, into the smoke and the clicking and my own cracking voice, one small figure went the wrong way. She went toward the walker. I want to be careful here, because this is the part they turned into the legend, and I hate what they did to it. In the recruiting version, she's running in slow motion with the light on her face, and it's beautiful and clean. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't clean. It was the most frightening thing I have ever watched, and I have watched a lot of frightening things. Ada Vance broke from the wall and ran directly at a machine 3 times taller than the wall she'd been standing on. She had her rifle and she had a satchel. I found out later what was in the satchel, and I'll tell you, and she had nothing else. No armor worth the name against that thing. No plan I could see. No backup, because who would follow a silent girl nobody had ever bothered to look at? I screamed at her, I did. I forgot she couldn't answer, and I screamed her name, Vance, no, fall back, Vance. And of course she didn't hear me, or didn't heed me, and the smoke swallowed her. Here's what I only pieced together after, from the ones who were closer, and from what she showed me later on that scratched-up slate, because she never did tell me out loud. The walker had a weakness. Every machine does. On a Kell walker, the cutting beam ran off a coolant line, and the coolant line ran along the underside of the belly plate, exposed for maybe 2 seconds every time the leg on that side lifted to take a step. 2 seconds, a gap the width of your hand. You'd have to be directly underneath a walking mountain, at the exact moment it stepped over you, and you'd have to put a charge on that line and not miss and not flinch and not run. Nobody knew that weakness. Nobody in my company anyway. But Ada Vance had spent 2 months alone on the wire runs, alone on loader duty, alone on the dead side perimeter watch I gave her because I didn't want to think about her. And do you know what a person does when nobody talks to them and nobody expects anything of them, and they've got hour after silent hour with nothing but the equipment? They study it. They read the manuals nobody else reads. They learn the machines the way lonely people learn things, completely, obsessively, because the machine doesn't overlook them back. She'd read the Kell technical bulletins, the dry ones, the ones that came through our own relay and that not one other soldier on that base had opened. She knew that walker better than the Kell who built it, and she knew the 2-second gap, and she had spent her exile making herself into a person who could stand under a walking mountain and not flinch. That's the part the legend gets wrong. It says she was fearless. She wasn't. Fearless is nothing. Fearless is just a broken alarm. What Ada Vance was afraid and steady anyway, which is the only kind of brave that's worth the word. She went in under it. I saw the end of it, if not the middle. The smoke thinned for a moment, moons like that get sudden winds, and I saw her. She was underneath the walker, directly underneath it. It was mid-stride, one great leg up, and she was in the crook of shadow beneath its belly, so small under all that iron that at first I thought I was seeing a piece of debris. She had the satchel open. She had her hands up over her head, pressed flat against the belly plate, doing something I couldn't make out. Placing the charge on the coolant line, in the 2-second window, with the whole weight of that thing about to come down on the exact spot she was standing. And then she ran, not before, not 1 instant before she was done. She placed it and then she ran, and I have thought about that 1,000 times since. The discipline it takes to finish the job first when every animal part of you is screaming to leave. And the walker's leg came down where she'd been, and she was already 3 strides gone, and the charge went off. It wasn't a big explosion. That's another thing the legend lies about. It was a small, ugly, perfectly placed explosion, right on the coolant line, and it didn't blow the walker up. It did something better. It killed the beam. The coolant vented, the cutting beam that had opened our wall dumped its own heat back into itself, and the whole underside of that machine went up in a white sheet of its own fire. The walker didn't fall dramatically, it sort of sagged. Came down on one side, slow, groaning, and lay in the gap it had made, burning from the inside, one leg still twitching. Dead. A mountain dead because one small silent person had read the manual nobody else read and had the spine to stand under it. And the Kell tide flinched. I felt it more than saw it. The clicking changed. For the first time since they'd come down through the clouds, the Kell hesitated because their walker was down and they didn't understand how. And even a machine thing with the feelings carved out of it has a kind of pattern, and we'd broken the pattern. In that flinch, that one held breath, I got my voice back. I stood up in the gap, over the burning walker, and I called my company home. Not to retreat, to fight. Because Ada Vance had just handed us a second we didn't deserve, and I was not going to waste it. I called them, and this is the part I'm proud of, the only part of that day I'm actually proud of. They came. Out of the smoke, out of the scatter, the twins and Paulo, and the 2 I thought I'd lost, and even the Bren, who dug himself half out from under the wall and dragged his gun with him because that's the kind of soldier he was. They came and they formed on me, on the gap, on the dead walker, and we held. We held the gap. We held the core. We held the antenna and the signal, and though we didn't know it, every blind colony in the sector, because the signal never dropped, not for 1 second of that whole long day. The relief fleet came at dusk, if you can call it dusk, on a moon with no sun. They came because the signal was still up, because we'd kept it up, because a girl I'd overlooked for 2 months had kept it up. The Kell broke and ran when the fleet lit the sky. Raiders always do. They're brave when they're winning, and they've got no stomach for a fair fight, and by then the fight was no longer theirs. And when it was over, when the clicking was gone, and the smoke was lifting, and the terrible quiet of after came down over Harrow 6, I went to find her. She was sitting against a broken loader on the dead side of the base, the side I used to put her on watch, because I didn't want to see her. She was hurt. Not badly, but hurt. The explosion had caught her more than she'd let on, and one arm was burned and she was holding it against herself, and there was blood dried on the side of her face. Paulo was already there, working on her, complaining about his knees, and she was letting him. And when I came around the loader, she looked up at me with those gray eyes and did the thing she always did. The small tilt of the head, "I heard you." I didn't know what to say. Me, a Sethari, a creature made of voice, whose whole people build their lives on the loud, clear word, and I stood in front of that small, silent human, and I had nothing. Because everything I could have said, I should have said already. I should have said it 2 months ago. I should have said it every day. I see you. You matter. You are not a broken tool. You are the best soldier in my company, and I never once looked at you. And now she'd gone and proved it in a way that made anything I said too late and too small. So I didn't make a speech. That would have been about me. Instead, I did the one thing my people do that means the most. I lowered my voice. Where I come from, you understand, you get loud to claim status. You get quiet to give it. The softest thing a Sethari can say is a kind of surrender. It means I put my voice beneath yours. You are the one who should be heard. We don't do it often. Most Sethari go a whole life without once giving it to anyone. I knelt down in the ash in front of Ada Vance, so my head was below hers, and I dropped my voice as low as it would go, barely a breath, and I said, "I'm sorry I never listened." I don't know if she understood what it cost me. Maybe she didn't. But she understood something, because her eyes went bright and wet, and she reached over with her good hand and picked up that scratched-up slate, the one she carried everywhere, and she thumbed out a few words and turned it around so I could read. I've kept those words. I'll keep them till I'm dead. She'd written, "You're listening now." They gave her a medal after. Of course they did. There was a ceremony, and an officer with a lot of rank who'd never set foot on Harrow 6 read out the story in the clean version, the slow-motion version, and pinned a bit of metal on her chest, and everyone clapped. She stood through it the way she stood through everything. Quiet, steady, that small tilt of the head. But I'll tell you the moment that actually mattered, the one no officer saw. It was the next morning. The relief had us bunked in temporary quarters while they rebuilt the wall, and the whole company was crammed into one long room, and for the first time in 2 months Ada Vance wasn't off alone on some dead-side detail. She was in with the rest of us. And the Bren gunner, the one who'd never once teased her, because there's no fun teasing someone who won't tease back, he limped over to her bunk on his bad leg, and he stuck out one enormous gray hand, and he said, gruff, "You're a mad little thing, and I'd follow you into anything." And Ada Vance looked at that hand, and she took it, and she smiled, a real one, the first I ever saw from her, and she still didn't say a word because she didn't have to anymore. We'd learned to hear her, all of us. The whole loud, misfit, cast-off 14th Auxiliary had finally learned that the quietest soldier in the company had been saying something all along, and we just never bothered to listen. You want to know what she was saying, all those silent months? "I'm still here, I'm still here. I'm still here." That's what silence is sometimes. Not weakness, not absence. Just a person holding on so tight to being alive that they've got nothing left over for noise. People ask me why she didn't talk. They always ask. Like it's the point of the story. It isn't, but I'll tell you the little I know because she trusted me with it eventually, and I think she'd want it told right. It was a colony before the service. One of those little pressurized mining towns out in the sector, exactly the kind we were bleeding to protect. There was an accident, or maybe it wasn't an accident, a hull breach, a slow leak, a warning system that failed. And Ada Vance was the one who noticed. A kid then. She noticed the numbers were wrong the way she noticed everything, quietly, off to the side, seeing what nobody else looked at. And she told them. She raised her voice, a child's voice, and she said something's wrong, and the grown-ups with the rank and the certainty looked right past her, because who listens to a quiet kid off in the corner? They overlooked her. The same way I'd overlook her, years later on a bruise-colored moon. By the time they listened, it was too late for a lot of people she loved. So she stopped, just stopped, decided the voice had failed her when it mattered most and put it down and picked up something else instead. She'd never let herself be overlooked again, but she'd never do it with noise. She'd do it with the one thing that couldn't be ignored, argued with, or looked past. She'd do it by being right and being ready, and standing under the mountain when the moment came. That's the girl I overlooked. That's the girl the whole galaxy overlooked, until cinder burned and she showed us all what she'd been building in that silence. I've told this story a lot of times now, to new recruits mostly. The green ones, the loud ones, the ones who think a soldier is measured by how much space they take up. I make them sit down and I tell it slow, all the boring parts left in, and at the end I always tell them the same thing, and I'll tell it to you now, because it's the only real lesson in any of it. Look at the quiet one. In every company, on every wall, in every unit anyone ever forms, there's a quiet one. The one who eats alone. The one you put on the dead side detail because you don't want to think about them. The one everybody takes their cue from you to overlook. Look at them. Actually look. Because you have no idea what they're building in all that silence, and one day, a day you didn't see coming, a day the sky opens up burning, that quiet one might be the only thing standing between your whole world and the dark. We nearly lost everything on Hero 6, because I couldn't be bothered to see the soldier standing right in front of me. We saved it because she saw everything. Nobody noticed the silent girl. Until they saw what she did in battle. And after that, after the ash settled and the wall got rebuilt and the metal got pinned and forgotten in some drawer, after all of it, there was one thing that never went back to the way it was. We never overlooked her again. None of us did, not once, not ever. You're listening now. We all were. Here's a thing nobody warns you about. Being overlooked can break a person. But being seen suddenly, all at once by everyone, that can break them too, just slower. And I watched it happen to Ada Vance, and for a while I couldn't do a single thing to stop it, because this time the danger wasn't a machine 3 times taller than a wall. This time it was us. I'll explain. After Hero 6, they didn't leave the 14th on that bruise-colored moon. You don't waste a unit that held a relay against the Kell, not once the story got out. And the story got out fast. Faster than the truth ever moves. By the time the relief fleet had us bunked and patched and loaded onto a proper transport, the whole sector already knew a version of what happened. The girl who killed the walker, they were calling her, the silent one who ran under the mountain. You have to understand how starved everyone was for a story like that. The war was going badly, out on the real fronts. Not the raider skirmishes, the actual war, the one the Kell were only ever a small ugly piece of. Whole systems falling. Whole fleets gone quiet. People wanted a reason to believe, and here came a small human girl who wouldn't even speak, standing under an enemy walker and killing it with her own 2 hands. That's not a soldier anymore. That's a symbol. And once the coalition brass decided Ada Vance was a symbol, they started using her like one. They pulled her off the line. That was the first thing. They wanted her safe, meaning they wanted her alive for the cameras, for the recruitment drives, for the morale reels. They flew her out to the core worlds and stood her up on stages in front of crowds and had officers read the clean version of Cinder off a screen while she stood there in a dress uniform she hated. And the crowds roared. And she said nothing, because of course she said nothing, and the not saying only made them love her more. I heard about all this secondhand at first. The 14th got reassigned to a staging front 2 jumps out, real fighting, and Ada wasn't with us. It felt wrong. I'd only just learned to see her, and they'd taken her away to be looked at by millions of strangers who didn't see her at all, who saw the dress uniform and the medal and the silence, and made up whatever they wanted about what was underneath. Paulo, my medic, put it best. He'd gotten close to her, patching her up after Cinder, and he'd kept in contact through the unit channels. One night on the staging front he showed me a message she'd sent him, just a photo of a slate. Her slate, the scratched-up one. 2 words on it. I'm drowning. That's all. And Paulo looked at me with those tired eyes and said, "They're going to use her up, Sergeant. They're going to hollow her out and put her on a poster." I didn't sleep much after that. I did the only thing I could do, which was pull rank in the One Direction rank let me pull. I put in a request, a formal one, up the chain, worded careful. Rifle Specialist Vance was combat critical to the 14th's cohesion. Her removal was degrading unit effectiveness. Request her return to active posting. Half of that was a lie and half of it wasn't. She was critical to us, but not in the way I wrote it. I didn't write down the true reason, which was that I'd overlooked her for 2 months, and I'd be damned if I let anyone else overlook who she actually was for 2 more. The request bounced around for weeks. Symbols aren't easy to pry loose, but the war has a way of making brass practical, and eventually the front got hot enough that even a poster girl was worth more with a rifle in her hands than on a stage, and the order came through. Ada Vance came back to the 14th on a transport, and I met her on the ramp same as the first time, except this time it was me who couldn't find the words. She looked worse than after the battle. That's the thing that got me. She'd healed clean, the burns had faded, the arm worked fine, but there was something scraped out behind her eyes that hadn't been there on the wall at Hero 6. On the wall she'd been afraid and steady. Now she was just tired in a way that fear can't make you, the kind of tired you get from being handled, from being turned into a thing. She came down the ramp with her duffel and that slate, and she stopped in front of me and she did the small tilt of the head. I heard you, and for a second I thought that was all it'd be. Then she thumbed something onto the slate and turned it around. "Thank you for pulling me out." She knew, of course she knew, she noticed everything, always had. She knew I'd put in the request. I didn't try to deny it or make it small. I just lowered my voice, the Sethari way, the way I'd learned to talk to her, and I said, "This is where you belong, not on a stage, here, with us." And her eyes did that bright wet thing again, just for a moment, before she blinked it back and made herself steady. She thumbed the slate one more time. "Don't let them take me back." "I won't," I said. I meant it too. I just didn't yet understand what it would cost to keep the promise. The staging front was called Aldous Reach. Another rock. The war was fought over rocks, mostly ugly little worlds nobody would live on for pleasure, but everybody wanted for the things buried in them. Aldous Reach had a colony, a big one, close to 40,000 people. Miners and their families, 3 generations deep, dug into the crust of a world with a thin poison sky and a long cold night. And the war was coming for it. Not the Kell this time. The Kell were the raiders on the edges. The thing coming for Aldous Reach was the war itself, the main enemy, the one the whole coalition was losing to. I won't give you the long history. You don't need it. All you need to know is that they were coming in force, a proper fleet, and the colony sat right in the path, and the math was ugly. Because there weren't enough ships to hold Aldous Reach and evacuate it. You could do one or the other. Command chose. They always choose. They decided the colony couldn't be held, the position was bad, the enemy too strong, and so the order came down for evacuation. Get the people out. Get as many as the transports could carry, in the time the enemy would give us, and abandon the rest of the rock. And here's the ugly middle of it, the part they don't put on recruitment reels. 40,000 people. Not enough transports for 40,000. Not in the time we had. The plan, when you did the real math, saved maybe 30. Maybe. The other 10,000 were a number on a slate that everyone agreed not to look at too hard. The 14th's job was the ground. We were the ones who'd hold the evacuation corridor, a single hardened route from the colony's deep shelters to the landing field where the transports came and went, and keep it open, and keep it moving, for as long as the enemy let us. We were the wall the people would run behind. And when the last transport lifted, whatever the count was, that was the count. The corridor would close, and the 14th, if we were lucky, would be on that last transport, and if we weren't, we'd be part of the number nobody looked at. I briefed the company in a cold prefab on the edge of the landing field. I gave it to them straight, I always do. Numbers, timeline, the ugly math and all. And I watched Ada Vance while I did it. Watched her face when I got to the part about 40,000 people and 30,000 seats. She went very still, stiller than usual, and she was always still. And I remembered standing there, the thing she'd trusted me with about her own past. A colony, a slow leak, a warning nobody heard, people she loved on the wrong side of a number. And now here she was, sent to a colony that was going to lose 10,000 people no matter what any of us did, and told to hold a line and count the seats. I should have seen it coming. I'd learned to see her, but I hadn't learned it deep enough yet. I saw the stillness and I thought it was fear. It wasn't fear. It was a decision forming behind those gray eyes, quiet as everything about her. The enemy hit us on the second day. The evacuation had been running since we landed, a river of people flowing up out of the deep shelters, down the hardened corridor, onto the transports that came and went, hauling loads of frightened colonists up out of the poisoned sky. It was working. Slow, but working. And the whole time the 14th stood the corridor, waiting, watching the horizon, knowing. When the enemy came, they came the way the war always came, overwhelming, and without mercy and fast. I'm not going to describe the enemy in detail. It doesn't matter to this story, and honestly some of it I still can't look at straight. Just know that they were more than us and better armed than us, and they came for the corridor because they understood exactly what it was, a thread of hope, and they wanted to cut it. We held it anyway. That's what the 14th did. We stood in that corridor and we held, and the river of people kept flowing behind us, and the transports kept coming, and every load that lifted was a few hundred more souls out of the fire. The Bren gunner held the left. The twins held the right, fighting exactly alike, terrible and beautiful. Paulo ran the wounded back and complained about his knees and saved lives with his complaining hands. And I stood in the middle and put my voice into it, all of it, calling the line, holding the shape of us together by sound alone the way my people do. And Ada Vance fought like I'd never seen anyone fight. Cinder had been one moment, one run, one charge, one perfect placed explosion. This was ours. This was a whole day of it, and she was in the worst of it the entire time, and she never broke and she never slowed. She'd found the enemy's rhythm the way she found everything's rhythm, quietly, off to the side, seeing the pattern nobody else saw, and she used it. She always knew where the next one was coming from. She always knew which piece of cover was about to fail. She'd tap a soldier on the shoulder and point, and they'd move, and a second later the spot they'd left would come apart. And after the third or fourth time of that, the whole company started watching where Ada looked. That's a thing I've never seen before or since. A silent soldier, commanding a battle by nothing but where she pointed her eyes. And the loud misfit 14th, who'd once taken their cue from me to overlook her, now took their cue from her to live. We held the corridor. The count climbed, 20,000 out, 25. The transports kept coming. And then the enemy changed the shape of the fight, the way a smart enemy does when the straight push isn't working. They stopped trying to cut the corridor from the front. They went under it. The deep shelters, where the people were coming up from, the enemy found a way into the tunnels beneath them. And they started coming up inside the colony, behind our line, in among the very people we were trying to save, in among the ones still waiting their turn, the ones at the bottom of the count, the last 10,000. The number nobody was supposed to look at. The command call came fast and cold. I heard it in my ear, same as every officer on that rock. The enemy was in the deep shelters. The last of the colonists, the 10,000 who were never going to make the transports anyway, by the ugly math, were about to be overrun. And the corridor was still open, still flowing, still hauling out the ones near the top of the count. The order was to hold the corridor, keep the thread open, keep saving the 30,000 who could be saved, and right off the deep shelters, right off the 10,000. Don't send anyone down into the tunnels, because anyone who went down wasn't coming back, and the corridor needed every rifle it had. It was the right call. I want to be clear about that, because I've had a lot of years to hate it and I still can't say it was wrong. You save who you can save. You don't throw good soldiers into a hole to die alongside people who were already lost. That's the math. That's what command is for, to make the ugly math so the rest of us don't have to. I gave the order to my company, hold the corridor, nobody goes down. And Ada Vance looked at me. She was maybe 10 meters away, in the thick of it, her rifle up, and she turned her head and she looked at me across all that noise and smoke. And I knew, the way you know things about a person you've finally learned to see, I knew exactly what she was thinking. She was thinking about a colony, a slow leak, a warning nobody heard, people at the bottom of the count. She was thinking that once, she'd been one of the ones nobody went down for. I shook my head. I put my voice into it, the low, urgent voice, the one that meant no, don't, please, Vance. Hold the line, that's the order. She looked at me a moment longer, and then she reached down to her belt, to the slate, and she thumbed something onto it fast, and she held it up so I could read it across 10 meters of burning air. I've kept those words too, I keep all of hers. She'd written, you saw me, now I go see them. And she turned, and she went down into the tunnels. Alone, the way she'd always done everything, the way I'd taught the whole galaxy to let her. I want to tell you I stopped her. I didn't. I want to tell you I went with her right then. I didn't do that either, not right away, and I'll carry that hesitation the rest of my life. Because for about 10 seconds I stood in that corridor and I did the math command wanted me to do. Hold the line. Save the 30. Right off the 10. It's the right call. It's the right call. And then Paulo, my medic, my old friend with the bad knees, appeared at my shoulder, and he'd read the slate too, and he looked at me, and he said the truest thing anybody said on that whole terrible rock. He said, Sergeant, we didn't hold Harrow 6 because it was the right call. We held it because she went, and we followed. And I understood. You want to know the real difference between a soldier and a symbol. A symbol does the right call. A symbol looks good on the poster doing the math. But a soldier, a real one, the kind that's afraid and steady anyway, a soldier sometimes looks at the ugly math and says not this time, and goes down into the hole, not because it's smart, but because there are people at the bottom of the count and somebody has to be the one who doesn't look away. Ada Vance was never a symbol. They tried to make her one and it had nearly hollowed her out. She was a soldier, and she just reminded me what that was actually worth. I made a choice then that I had no right to make and would make again 1,000 times. I split the company. I left the Bren and the twins and half the 14th on the corridor under my best corporal, holding the thread, saving the 30 because that mattered, that always mattered, and I wasn't going to trade 30,000 for 10 out of guilt. But me and Paulo and the other half, we went down. Into the tunnels, after the silent girl. To go see them. The deep shelters were a nightmare I won't fully describe, out of respect for the people who were in them. 10,000 souls in the dark, in the crush, in the poison-tinged air of a colony's guts, and the enemy coming up through the floor of it. Panic is its own kind of enemy in a place like that. People die in the crush who'd never have died in the fight. We found Ada in the middle of it, and she was already doing the thing she did. She wasn't fighting, not mostly. She was organizing, silently. She'd gotten up on something high where she could be seen, and she was directing the whole terrified mass of people with her hands and her eyes and the sheer unbreakable stillness of her. This way, that way, hold, move, wait, go. And the people, who a moment ago had been a panicking mob dying in the dark, were following her. Because there's something about a small, silent person, standing perfectly steady in the middle of hell, that makes a crowd believe there might be a way out. She'd found one too. Of course she had. She noticed everything. While the rest of us had been fighting the corridor, she'd studied the colony schematics, the boring ones, the ones nobody reads, and she knew there was a second route. An old maintenance shaft, a mining lift, disused, forgotten, running from the deep shelters up to the surface on the far side of the landing field. Not on any evac plan, not in anyone's ugly math. A way up that Command didn't know existed, because Command was looking at the numbers and Ada Vance was looking at the place. It wouldn't save all 10,000, nothing would, but it might save a lot of them. A second thread that nobody had counted on, opened up by the one person everybody had spent their whole lives overlooking. I got to her and she saw me, and I'll never forget this. She didn't look surprised that I'd come. She'd known I would. She'd known that if she went, we'd follow, same as Hero 6. She'd trusted us to see her, and we had. She pointed at the old lift shaft, then at me, then made a gesture I understood at once. You get them up, I hold the bottom. Because the enemy was still coming up through the floor, and somebody had to stand between the enemy and the crowd flowing toward the lift, and hold, and hold, and hold, for as long as 10,000 frightened people needed to funnel up an old shaft into the poison dawn. I didn't argue. There was no time to argue, and there was no argument to make. I put my voice into the crowd, a Sethari's voice, built for exactly this, built to carry over any noise, and I moved them, thousands of them, up toward that lift, calling the way like it was the last thing my voice would ever do. And Ada Vance and Paulo and a handful of the 14th turned around and put their backs to us and their faces to the enemy and held the bottom of the shaft. I don't know how long it took. Time goes strange in a thing like that. Long enough that my voice gave out, actually gave out, cracked and died, so that at the end I was moving people up that shaft with nothing but my hands and my eyes, the way Ada had taught me, the way the silent girl showed the loud man how to lead when the noise runs out. The lift wasn't fast. It was old, and it groaned, and it took the people up in loads, load after load, into the thin poison dawn where the corridor's transports rerouted, because I'd screamed for them on the last of my voice before it came down to the far field to catch them. Thousands went up. Not all 10, but thousands. Thousands who, by the ugly math, by the number nobody was supposed to look at, should have been dead in the dark. And at the bottom of the shaft, Ada Vance held. I couldn't see it. I was up top, moving people, my back to the fight the way she'd once had her back to me. But Paulo told me after. Paulo, who stood beside her at the bottom the whole time and lived, and never once complained about his knees again for the rest of the time I knew him. He said she was magnificent. He said she fought like the whole thing was a machine. She'd read the manual for every angle, every rhythm, every gap. He said the enemy couldn't get past her, couldn't understand her, because she moved wrong, moved quiet, moved like something they had no pattern for. He said the last of the 14th held that shaft because she was in the middle of them and you simply could not break beside her. Her steadiness was contagious. Her silence was a wall. And when the last load went up the lift, the last of the ones who could be saved, the true last, the very bottom of the count, Paulo grabbed her and pulled her onto it, and she let him, and the old groaning lift hauled them up out of the dark into the light. She came up alive. I need you to know that. This isn't that kind of story. She came up burned again and bleeding again and so tired she could barely stand, but alive, and Paulo alive beside her, and behind them the empty dark where 10,000 people had been and where now, thanks to her, a good many thousand weren't, because they were up top in the poison dawn being loaded onto transports and lifted out of the fire. We didn't save them all. I want to be honest, always honest, the way she taught me and the way I've tried to be with you this whole time. We didn't save all 10,000. The math is still ugly. Some number stayed at the bottom of the count and I think about them and Ada thought about them till the day, well, I'll get there. But we saved more than the math said, a lot more. Because one silent soldier looked at the number nobody was supposed to look at, and said not this time and went down. And we followed. There was no medal for Aldous Reach. That's the difference between the two stories, and it's the difference that tells you everything. Cinder got a medal because Cinder made command look good. A girl kills a walker, holds a relay, the war gets a symbol, pin it on, roll the cameras. But Aldous Reach was a soldier disobeying a direct order, splitting off from the sanctioned plan, dragging half a company down into a whole command had written off. Aldous Reach was the ugly math being defied. You don't give medals for that. You give it the other thing, the quiet thing. The word passed soldier to soldier, unit to unit, front to front, the story that never makes the reels but never dies either. The story that goes. There was a silent girl, and command wrote off 10,000 people, and she went down after them and we followed, and thousands lived who were supposed to die. That story is worth more than a medal. That story is the thing that makes a green loud recruit sit up straight and think maybe, just maybe, the point of the uniform isn't the poster. Command wasn't happy with me. I'll be honest about that too. There was an inquiry. There were words like insubordination and unauthorized deviation. And I stood in front of the officers and I told them the truth, which was that I'd do it again, and that the 14th had held the corridor and opened the shaft, and that we'd saved 30,000 and thousands more. And if that was insubordination, then the word had lost its meaning. They couldn't do much to me. That's the thing about the ugly math, it cuts both ways. It's hard to punish a man for saving thousands of people, even if he saved them the wrong way, even if he saved them by following a silent girl into a hole. So they buried the inquiry, and they buried the shaft in the after-action report, and they took the 30,000 from the corridor and put those on the poster, and Ada Vance and the 10,000 and the old groaning lift got left out of the clean version. She didn't mind. I asked her once if it bothered her that Aldous Reach never got told right, never got the medal, never made the reels. She thought about it a while, the way she thought about everything. Then she picked up her slate and thumbed out her answer and turned it around. The ones who lived know, that's enough. And it was. For her it was enough. Because Ada Vance never needed the galaxy to see her. She'd learned, a long time ago in a colony with a slow leak, that being seen by the crowd doesn't save anyone. She only ever needed the ones who mattered, the ones at the bottom of the count, the ones in the dark, the ones nobody else went down for. She only ever needed them to know she'd come. And they knew. Every one of the thousands who went up that old lift, they knew. Somewhere out there right now, on a dozen scattered worlds, there are people alive who tell their children about the silent girl who came down into the dark when the numbers said don't, who held the bottom of a shaft so a crowd could climb out of hell, who never said a word the whole time and didn't need to. That's a better monument than any poster. I said I'd get there, so I'll get there, and then I'll let you go. Ada Vance served out the war with the 14th. She never went back to the stages, never went back to being a symbol. I kept that promise, kept it hard, fought for it every time some officer with a poster in his eye came sniffing around wanting to borrow the girl who killed the walker. She stayed with us. She stayed a soldier. She fought a dozen more fights I could tell you about and won't, because this story's already long, and because some of them belong to the people who were there, and not to a recruiting reel. She lived. I want to say that plainly because you might be bracing for the other thing the way stories like this usually go. She lived. She made it through the whole war, which is more than a lot of us can say, more than the Bren gunner, who I lost on a rock I won't name, and more than one of the twins, which broke the other one in a way that never healed. But Ada lived. Steady and silent and afraid and brave, all the way through to the end of it. And when it was over, when the war finally guttered out the way even the worst wars do, she didn't stay in. She'd had enough of numbers by then. She went home, not to the colony she'd lost as a child, that was long gone, but to a new one of the little pressurized mining towns out in the sector, exactly the kind we'd bled to protect. And do you know what she did there? She became the one who listens. I'm not making that up for the ending. She did. She got herself put in charge of the safety systems, the warning systems, the slow leak sensors, the boring alarms nobody reads until it's too late. The exact kind of system that had failed her as a child, that had overlooked a quiet girl in a corner who noticed the numbers were wrong. She spent the rest of her life making sure that in her town, at least, the quiet warning never got missed. That somebody was always listening for the sound nobody else heard. I visited her near the end. We were both old by then. She'd taught herself to speak again, a little in the years after the war, just a little, just with the people she trusted, in a rough, rusty voice she almost never used. And when I came through her door that last time, she used it. She looked at me in old Sethari, gone gray in the crest, voice not what it was, and she said, out loud in that rough, rare voice, the only full sentence I ever heard her speak. You saw me. 2 words she'd once written on a slate in the ash at Harrow 6, turned around and handed to me the day everything changed. Only now she said them, out loud, to my face. A gift from a woman who gave her voice out about as often as my people do, which is to say almost never, which is to say it meant everything. I lowered my voice, the Sethari way, the way I'd learned to talk to her a whole lifetime ago, put it beneath hers, gave her the last of my status the way I'd given her the first of it, kneeling in the ash. I saw you, I said. Everybody sees you now. And she smiled, the real one, the rare one, the one the Bren gunner earned first with his enormous gray hand all those years ago, and she shook her head. Slow, because I'd gotten it wrong one last time and she wanted to fix it before I left. She picked up a slate. She still kept one, even now, even with the voice come back. Old habits. She thumbed out a few words and turned it around, the way she had 10,000 times, the way she'd been turning slates around to make the galaxy listen her whole life. And it said, it was never about being seen, it was about seeing them. The ones at the bottom of the count, the ones in the dark, the ones nobody goes down for. That's what she'd been trying to tell us the whole time, all those silent years. Not look at me, never look at me. She'd have hated the poster if she'd let herself feel anything about it. What she was saying all along in all that silence was look at them. The overlooked ones, the quiet ones, the numbers nobody wants to see. Because she'd been one of them once, and nobody came. So she spent her whole life being the one who came. I've told this story a lot of times now. Both halves of it, the metal half and the no metal half, the half that made the poster and the half that didn't. And the green recruits, the loud ones, they always loved the first half, the walker, the run, the girl under the mountain. But it's the second half I make them sit still for. The half with the ugly math and the hole in the dark and the old groaning lift. Because the first half is about being seen. And that's a fine thing, being seen, being noticed, finally getting your due after everyone overlooked you. But the second half is about seeing. And that's the harder thing and the truer thing, and the thing Ada Vance spent a whole silent life trying to teach a loud galaxy that would never quite shut up long enough to hear it. Look at the quiet one, I tell the recruits. I always tell them that. But now, since Aldous Reach, since the tunnels and the lift and the number nobody was supposed to look at, now I tell them the other half too. And be the quiet one for somebody else. Be the one who looks at the number nobody wants to see. Be the one who goes down into the dark when the math says don't. Because someday you'll be at the bottom of somebody's count. Everybody is, eventually. And when that day comes, you'll pray to whatever you pray to that there's an 8 advance in the world, some quiet, steady, overlooked soul who looked at the ugly math and said not this time and came. Nobody noticed the silent girl until they saw what she did in battle. And then, the part the poster never told, she spent the rest of her life making sure she noticed everybody else. You're listening now. Good. Now go find somebody nobody's listening to. And listen.